Welcome back, everyone. In this video, we are going to begin the process of typing out our final project, which is our Crwn-Clothing application. Now, I am not going to lie to you. The process of learning TypeScript with Redux is actually quite a steep learning curve. The reason why it's so challenging is because we have to learn a lot of new concepts, as well as flexing the ones that we know already in a manner that makes it so our code is extensible in Redux. The main thing, though, is that once you type Redux, you will accelerate your understanding of TypeScript quite significantly. But there is a lot of code changes that we need to make in order to make our code work with Redux the way we need it to, where it's type safe. Now, the first thing that we need to do is install the relevant libraries. So this is a command that we're pulling from the Create React App Adding TypeScript section of the docs. Again, you can check your resources folder for that. And as this is installing, what we're also going to need is our tsconfig file. So here inside of our application, just like we did with our actual Monsters Rolodex project, we are going to add in a tsconfig file. So here, just do tsconfig.json. And again, look inside your resources folder and find the actual tsconfig file that I have included. And then I want you to paste that in here. Once you have this, you're going to go into your reducerutils.js file. We are going to start with Redux first because this is where our data lives. And from Redux, we are going to have to learn and touch upon a lot of additional concepts in order to make this code work. So I'm not going to lie to you. As I mentioned earlier, this is going to be quite complex. In fact, we're going to learn a lot of concepts that TypeScript introduces, such as function overloading, some really interesting usage of generics, as well as some additional functionality that we can get from the utilization of TypeScript features. The first thing that we need to do is think about what we're going to do and why. So in this video, I'm going to highlight how we're going to convert this over to TypeScript. We're going to start with the simplest reducer that we have, which is our categories reducer. Inside of our categories reducer, we are going to start with our actions. What we know about our action types is that we have this object that has these fields that we want. The thing about these fields, though, is that these are not just strings. These, in fact, are specific constants. They just happen to be strings. But really, what we're saying is that there are only 3 actions that our categories reducer or category saga, or any reducer, in fact, can recognize that is relevant to the categories. And it is these 3 values. These are the only 3 category-related action types. So this can actually be converted to an enumerable type, which is an enum. And an enum is a special, it's not even a type, it's actually an extended version or extended data structure that TypeScript introduces to us. And it's usable the same way that you can use an object. The only thing about it is that it has fixed values. In other words, instead, when you hover over categories action type right now with our object, notice how these keys point to strings. Instead, if we were to convert this to an enum, so first, let's convert this from JS to TS. What we can do is say export enum, category action types, and you get rid of this equal sign. And then instead of these colons, you set an equal. And this is your enum. Now, if you hover over it, enum categories action type is going to contain these 3 members, meaning that the 3 values that you can use as keys, just like you do with objects, though, they will only be equal to one of these 3 options. So this first step allows us now to essentially capture these literal string values, these literal strings, as the types themselves that we need to reference. So that's the first thing. By doing this now, when we go into our category action, just like before, we still have these create actions generating these action objects for us. But now we need to type these actions. The thing, however, with our reducer is that what we need to do is that inside of our reducer, we want to isolate the actions we respond to, because here we know we're going to receive every action. But the actions we want to respond to are specifically the category's action types. So essentially what happens is that only when we receive an action of these three types do we actually want our reducer to react. Now, regardless of the fact that we receive all the actions that ever fire, because in Redux that does happen. Remember, every reducer gets every action. Our reducer does technically only care about these three. So there needs to be a way where we can generically type the action, but inside of our reducer, we want to narrow the scope so that our actions are only the ones that are relevant to us, which are these three action types. So we need to think of a way so that we can extend upon our action creator so that we can make it work inside of Typescript. The other thing as well is that inside of this reducer, we will need something known as type narrowing, and that comes from using type predicates. And we're going to discuss that when we go back to our reducer utils, and we are going to write some additional functionality here. But the key thing that we're talking about right now is that we need to generate from these action creators some way that we know exactly the specific kinds of actions that exist. And the specific kind of actions are going to be some kind of action object, of course. But inside of our category action, there's only three specific types of actions possible. And they are these three defined actions. There is an action with the type categories start, but no payload. And then there is an action where the type is fetch category success with a categories array as the actual payload, and then categories failed with that fetch categories failed as the type, and then an error as the payload. But the thing is that they are essentially unique actions because these actions have very specific types, as we just defined with our action types. We need our reducers to respond in kind, but they also need to be smart enough to know that when you fetch a specific kind of action, that there is exactly the correct payload on it. So if this seems a little confusing, don't worry. As we type it out, it will make more sense. But I'm definitely going to tell you that what we're going to learn is very hard. So if it takes time to absorb, don't worry. It's expected. It's how it should be. So now that I've gone over the high level, what we're going to do, let's go back to our reducer utils and let's start working through what I mentioned. So we'll do that in the next video. I'll see you there.